Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or your digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organization. Each and every episode, we sit down with leaders from various fields, just like you're grabbing a cup of coffee with them. We dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how can you, as a leader, cut through the noise and clarify your message so it resonates deeply with your team or audience? I mean, as a leader, every single day we're communicating something, whether it's in a team meeting, whether it's over an email, whether it's a pitch or a presentation. And why do so many leaders, including myself, who've communicated for years and years and years, we still struggle to make our message clear? Well, today I am beyond excited to have a guest whom I deeply admire and respect. I've read his book, Marketing Made Simple. My dog also has read it because the dog chewed it up in a little bit there. But if I opened it up, it is just highlighted and taken notes. I've listened to so many different podcasts, followed Dr. J.J. Peterson for a long, long time. It is such an honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Oh my goodness. So happy to be here. And thanks for that intro. That was very kind.
Absolutely. Well, I could keep going, but I don't want to give our audience, he really likes Dr. JJ, so I'll keep it. But hey, before we hop into the conversation, I'd love if you just share a little bit of your story, who you are, what you do, kind of what's got you to this place.
Yeah. So I work for a company called StoryBrand with Donald Miller, and we help companies clarify their message and through the power of story. So my background is really kind of a bit all over the place. It felt like until I at least landed in this role. I don't know if anybody else feels like that, but I came out of college and I actually worked for a nonprofit that had changed my life. When I was in college, I went to Mexico with this nonprofit to build homes in the slums of Tijuana. Changed my life. I came back out and I said, what do you guys need? I just want to come work for you. And they said, we need somebody in marketing. And I said, okay. And I changed my degree to marketing to go into marketing and
Wow.
public relations. Literally, I was an elementary education major and I changed my degree to be in marketing and graduated and went to work for that nonprofit. And I started out my career doing just that, doing marketing and speaking and leading kind of in the nonprofit space. I eventually became a pastor and taught every weekend and led, a lot of different people. And then from there went into improv comedy and actually toured and did improv comedy for about 3 years, not a huge leap from being essentially a youth pastor to comedy.
Yep.
But what was really interesting is while I was touring doing comedy, I was at a ton of conferences and I would be at gatherings of all sizes, like corporate ones. And I would be at these huge ministry conferences and huge leadership conferences. And I would see people on stage. I don't get to talk about this a lot because I don't step into the leadership space a lot. So I feel really lucky to be here today. I speak so much in marketing, but what really led me into what I'm doing now was as I was on tour and I would see these people speaking on stages, or I'd be like back behind the scenes watching, I'll just say, some egomaniacs try to lead teams in these spaces and really leave a lot of damage in the wake of the leadership that they were bringing to the table. It made me really upset. And I also at the time was kind of done with touring. I didn't want to be on the road as much. And so I was trying to figure out what's my next move. And my next move was I wanted to go back and get my master's degree and help raise up the next generation of leaders. That was like my whole, that's what I decided to do. And so I left comedy and I went back and I got my master's, and my master's is in theology and the arts. So it's actually study of story and film and television. And I wanted to be a professor in the arts because I really felt like that when you use creativity and storytelling to impact culture and impact people. It's actually what I discovered even through my studies. It's the most powerful way to move people to action is through the power of story. So I wanted to get really good at story, and I wanted to teach the next generation of leaders how to use stories and how to be good leaders, good
Mm,
people in many ways, because I was
yes.
just at all these places seeing frankly really horrible communicators and really horrible leaders. And so that's exactly what I did. I left comedy. I went back. I became a college professor. I started teaching at multiple universities and ended up also becoming dean of students at a university in Southern California. But all that while also, because I loved story so much, I did some television and film. And so I was doing I was on an episode of The Office and on West Wing and kind of all of this stuff. So I was keeping my hands in kind of this leadership space and story space. And when and when I'm in, Southern California, I ended up selling a reality television show, as you do, as most people do in Southern California, to a production company. And so I was leaving the school, and Donna Miller came and he spoke at. I wanted him to speak at the university because at the time he was teaching people how to become the hero of your own story, how to live
Mm,
a life of meaning. And so I wanted my students to hear that. And it was kind of a gift to me because he was one of my favorite authors. And he came in and said, and we became friends. And he said, "Oh, you're changing careers. You're going back into Hollywood. I'm just launching this new thing called StoryBrand, trying to figure out how to help people clarify their message using story." He's like, "You've been in Hollywood. Your master's is in story. My PhD is in narrative theory and narrative marketing." And he's like, "So you've studied all this stuff. You've taught all this stuff. And I'm the only one teaching this. Can you come to Nashville and like maybe just show up every once in a while and help me teach?" And that's how I ended up now working. From there, now I've been here 10 years and have been, I get to work with companies literally all over the world, everything from like Microsoft to the US Olympic Committee and Tempur Sealy, Mitsubishi, and help them really clarify their message and clarify their communication using the power of story. So I usually don't get to tell that part of my story because I'm
right.
on I'm on marketing podcasts, but because I'm here, you get to hear actually the more real one, to be very honest, of what got me to where I am today. It really was those moments of being on tour and seeing horrible communicators and horrible leaders and going, "I do not want the next generation to be like this." And
Yes.
so I literally picked a master's degree that had something to do with story that I could go back and raise up the next generation of leaders.
Oh, I love that. We were probably at some of the same youth specialties,
Oh yeah.
national youth worker conventions. Oh, I love those.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you may have seen me on stage at comedy because we did comedy at those. So
Oh, I'm
kind of
sure I
funny.
did. I'm sure I did. I was at many of them. I was a faithful, with Tick and Marco and
Yep.
all of those, those ones. And then I became a David Crowder, groupie.
Didn't we all?
All those
Didn't we
years.
all?
So go back for a second. So you were on
Yeah.
episode of The West Wing. I have to
Yes, I
ask.
was. Yeah, that was my very first job in Hollywood. Actually, was being an extra on the set of The West Wing, and I was in the press corps, and went around on Air Force One. So that was pretty fun. For that to be my very first experience in Hollywood, it's kind of unbelievable.
Wow. And then you just said something that I have not heard in any of the hundreds of times I've heard you on podcasts and, all of that kind of stuff. You were on an episode of The Office?
Yeah, very. There's a wild story there. We really don't have time. It's a long story, but
No
I
worries.
was on. I was the episode where Dwight wins an award. So I think it's season 2. He
Oh,
wins an
yeah?
award for being like salesman of the year, and
Uh-huh.
I'm in the crowd, and so you
Oh,
can kind of see me in the crowd. But I will give a short version of it. I ended up meeting Steve Carell ahead of time and introducing him to a big fan. Like I just kind of went up to him. This lady like almost passed out
oh,
uh, seeing him. And so I actually went over on her behalf and like just said, "Would you mind go talking to her?" He goes and talks to her. They have this sweet moment. He comes back and thanks me. Then we're in that scene and he is improvising from the stage. He like the scene is he gets up on stage and improvises, and everybody in the crowd kept laughing and ruining the takes. So they all got up and left. and I'm going up to leave with, like, they're kicking, hundreds of us out. And he said, and he sees me and he goes, "Man, that was kind of wild earlier, wasn't it?" And he starts talking. And so he and I are just chatting while everybody's leaving. And I go, "Well, hey, I gotta head out." And he goes, "No, no, no, just stay, just stay." And so I'm sitting in the audience. It's just me. So if you watch that scene, there's hundreds of people in this crowd. But when he's actually filming those scenes, because everybody was laughing, they made him leave, and he is actually performing just to me in that crowd. And so I'm there because I guess he wanted somebody to look at or something while he was doing it. So I'm in the crowd. I don't think he could actually really see me because the lights were down, but he was like, "Yeah, just stick around." And so I got a one-on-one show from Steve Carell doing improv on stage, while everybody else was kicked out because they couldn't
Oh,
stop laughing.
that is amazing. Dwight is just incredible on that one. The pounding the podium and
Yep.
I mean, yeah. When I was years ago off camera, we talked about I worked at a church in the Chicago area, and I had broken my ankle, and my brother came over with these DVDs, and he says, "You've got to watch this TV show." And then I was hooked. I was hooked.
Yep.
And so now, as a public speaker, so often I got to stop myself because many times I'll be up front and I'll say something. It's like I set myself up with the perfect "that's what she said" comment. I'm like, you can't, don't, don't enough.
Yep. Yep.
Oh my goodness. Well, I love your heart too about helping the future generation, because that's why we kind of started to speak with people, not at them. I can remember years and years of watching people up front, and it just felt like they were just like throwing their words at me, pointing down, manipulating. And we thought there's got to be a better way. And so this episode is actually in a series where we talk about lead with instead of at, where so often when we lead at people, we use fear, we use control. But when you lead with, you can use trust and collaboration, and you get so much further. And so this just set itself up brilliantly. So thank you for sharing your heart on that.
Oh, no problem. It's
I
like
love
I
it.
said, I'm so excited to talk about this stuff.
Well, then let's, from a leadership standpoint, why do
Yeah.
you think, and I know we don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but it is amazing as leaders, we do struggle so often clarifying our message, even if it's just addressing our team, even if it's pulling a couple people aside and we say things like, "Does that make sense? Does that make sense?" And we get these stares. Why is this so difficult for us at times?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to it, and there's there's a bunch of, even I would argue, psychology behind it, that we're all very flawed people, and we're all very, like, and so we're trying to, in many ways, like, overcome our flaws, and we think that the way that we overcome our flaws is by having everything together, putting it, being strong, coming at people hard, and leading almost in like a General Patton kind of way. Like, we're going over here and everybody's going. We think that because that's the model of leadership we've been given. And I think it was actually Brian McLaren who said, "I think there's another way, that there's more of the Dorothy style of leadership where you I'm lost. You're missing a little bit of your heart. You're missing a bit of your brain. You're missing courage. Let's link arms and go together."
Mm.
And I think that's a much stronger way to lead, but it has to come from a place of humility. And
Oof.
what it really comes down to, I would argue, is, I think, so. I'll kind of go back into my area of expertise and study, which is story. And one of the things that you have to realize about story is there are really four main characters in a story. And these four characters exist in a story because they exist in all of us.
Mm.
The main four archetypes are hero, villain, victim, and guide. Those are kind of the four characters, main characters in a movie or a story. The villain, I'm sorry, the victim really just exists in the story to make the villain look bad and the hero look good. That's
Mm.
kind of it. They're basically energy takers. And no good stories are written about victims that stay victims. They're just always there. They suck energy essentially from other characters. The hero and the villain both have a backstory of pain, similarly, a backstory of pain.
Mm.
The villain tries to revenge the pain. The hero tries to redeem the pain,
Mm.
but they are actually still both working out of a place of brokenness.
Wow.
And so that's why through a story, the hero's journey is up and down. It's rocky. The hero wins a little bit and then they get cocky and they go down, and they're up and they're down. And that's the hero's journey all the way through. And it's because they're actually operating out of a place of brokenness. So when they heal a little bit of their brokenness and they get a little bit of a win, they start to get a little cocky. And then all of a sudden it's like, bam, right back down. And you just see it in movies over and over again. I mean,
Yep.
basically heroes get beat up the entire movie, internally, externally, like emotionally, they're just beat up. But we look at the hero of the film and we all feel like we want to be the hero of of any story. The reality is heroes are weak and are often working out of a backstory of pain that they have not healed from yet.
Mm.
So they're trying to prove themselves. They're trying to prove their value. They're trying to prove their worth. They're trying to work very hard in order to be the hero of the story. The reality is they're not actually the hero of the story till the very end.
Mm.
Through the most of it, they're up and down. They're actually one of the weaker characters in the story. The fourth character that exists is a character called the guide. The guide is actually the strongest character in the story and is the one that ultimately has already, in many ways, healed their back pain, their backstory of pain, has already won the day. So they don't have to prove anything. So, in terms of like, you've seen this in so many movies. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is the hero. And you watch him through the movie, and he's a whiner. He's like up and down. He's insecure. He's all over the place. He's kind of like, you're like, why does anybody like this guy? Right? He kisses his sister. I mean, it's just like, he's all over the place. The guide in the story is Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda. They are the steady, they are the strong, they are the ones who've already achieved everything they need to achieve, and their job is not to win the day because they've already won it. Their job is to help the hero win the day. Same thing, Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. There's Gandalf and then there's Frodo. In Hunger Games, there's Haymitch and there's Katniss. There's always somebody who has already won the day, who in reality doesn't need to prove anything, that can help other people win.
Mm.
Now, I say all that to say, and again, what I said in the beginning is that those four archetypes exist in story because they exist in us. And I can play all four characters in one day. Sometimes I play the victim, and there are real victims
Yep.
out there. This is not
Yep.
like victim shaming or anything. But there are times I play the victim when I am not. There are times I am a villain. I revenge my pain and hurt other people. There are times that I'm a hero and I work to redeem my own pain and maybe the pain of others. And then, but the ultimate goal in my life is to play the guide, is to help other people win, to help other people become heroes of their own story. So going back to your original question, is it why do sometimes when we get up and communicate as leaders, I think a lot of times we get up and we are actually operating out of our insecurities, and our insecurities try to force us to become stronger than we think we are, which
Wow.
means then we become that general Patton who leads the way. We become the person who becomes authoritative. We become the person who gets our authority is threatened. And so we go, you're either in or you're out. You do this or you don't. And the reality is, everybody else is also trying to be the hero of their own story too. And so now we're all competing in different stories. We're actually competing against each other. If I'm up and I'm communicating from the stage or from in just a meeting, and I'm trying to be the hero of my story, and you are in my audience and you're trying to be the hero of your story, we're actually in competing stories because one of us has to win and one of us has to lose. But if I can actually move into that space in my communication style, in my leadership style, as a guide, then I actually step into your story. I'm not inviting you into mine. I'm coming into your story, and I am actually moving alongside you and helping you win. Now we're in the same story and we both win. And that's what I teach people to do essentially in marketing, is recognize that their customer is the hero and they're the guide. But it really, in any communication, if I'm up on stage, and here I'll give a very quick little example. Part of why I don't actually usually share that I was in the office or that I was on, I was on West Wing. Whenever I'm speaking, I don't get up on stage and I do not tell those stories because that's my story.
Mm.
And if I'm going to get up on stage and I start telling a funny story about when I was in the office or met Steve Carell, I am getting you to like me. I am trying to feel better about myself in that moment. And I am trying to be the hero. I want everybody to walk away and go, JJ was great. That's what I'm trying to do in that moment. And I know if I start with one of those stories when I'm on stage, people are going to remember it. They're going to remember me, but they're going to remember my story. Instead, if I actually walk up on that stage and I say at a marketing conference, and I walk up on that stage and I say, everybody is here because they want to grow their business. But here's the problem: you're wasting millions of dollars every year on marketing that is not connecting with your customers. I don't get up on stage and tell my story. I get up on stage and tell my audience's story. And then through that process, I position myself as their guide. And
Wow.
I give them the tools and the skills and the knowledge to be able to win their own story. And I have just found for myself, not only is that incredibly effective for everybody, but everybody, I feel better about myself
Yeah.
because I'm no longer working out of my insecurities and trying to win the day. My job is to help other people win. And I am more fulfilled by that, and other people win too.
Wow. Wow.
So I know I just
Well,
talked a lot.
you
I tell you,
just
I have
gave
a
us a
PhD
master
in this. I
class.
can get really nerdy. I could go real nerdy about it, but
Oh, I love it. Oh my goodness. Well, I coach some leaders who want to be public speakers and, do a better job up front. And people get so nervous, right? Oh, there's so many nerves and we get in front of people. And I think as I talk with people, a lot of that is due to the fact that we want to be liked and we want them to remember our story. But if we take all, like just what you said, and we just put all that energy into the audience and helping them succeed, boy, it's amazing how the nerves go down.
100%, because the story's not about us.
Right.
My job is there to help other people win. And do I always do it perfectly? No. And do I still want to be liked in the process? Absolutely. I'm
Sure.
still human. I want good reviews. If I get reviews when I'm at a conference and
Yep.
9 of them are fantastic and 1 is bad, I'm thinking about the bad. I mean, just that's the reality of being human. And I don't think we can always live in the guide space 100% of the time.
Yeah.
They only do in movies because they've simplified the story. But
Right.
Gandalf doesn't always feel great about himself, I'm sure.
Right.
you know, you know,
Right.
Obi-Wan has some doubts. But the reality is, if I can live in that space, and really what I've dedicated my career to really is teaching people to try to live more in the guide space than any of the other four. Like the villain or the hero or the victim. Is that if you can live more of your life in the guide space, I think just in your mindset, that's one thing. But really, where it's changed everything for me is communication,
Yes.
because I know. So this is how it changes everything. When I walk into a meeting, my job as a guide is to help heroes solve their problem. That's actually the power of story. The really, like, one of the key elements of story is the power of the problem in the story. So think about any movie you've ever seen. Is within about 12 minutes of the movie, the main hero has to encounter a problem or we're not hooked into the story.
Right.
And the bigger the problem, the bigger the hook. So in Armageddon, it is an asteroid that's coming to Earth and we're all going to die in 7 days.
Right.
In, in, Taken, Liam Neeson's daughter is taken and he has 24 hours to find her or she's gone forever. The
Yep.
bigger the problem, the bigger the hook. If Liam Neeson's daughter gets kidnapped, he gets on the phone and starts doing I have a very special set of skills. He's going to go after her.
Yep.
And all of a sudden he hops on the call and goes, just kidding, Dad. I'm like, my friends and I are in Europe and we're like on a little vacation.
Right.
And then the rest of the movie is them hanging out in Europe. Boring
Right.
movie. The power and the hook of a story comes in that problem. And it comes very early in a movie, in a book. And really, the rest of the movie or the book is about the hero trying to overcome that problem. And it's very, very clear. When you take that principle and apply it to leadership communication, and if you're really trying to play the guide, your job in any situation when you're getting up and trying to invite people into a story that they can be a part of, that they get to be the hero of, what you're doing is you have to understand what problem you're helping them solve. So, for instance, if you get up in front of an audience, let's just use a very boring example. We are going to change our team communication platform from Slack to Circle. Okay, that's just a very, what would feel like a very boring thing.
Yep.
And yet, everybody on your team has spent the past 3 years building up memes in Slack, and they have side conversations in Slack that they want to go back
Yep.
to, and all this stuff. And you've decided it's cheaper to go to Circle. So you just go, hey, we're moving to Circle because it's cheaper. That's my story. What I have to realize is, how does moving to Circle actually solve a problem for them? So instead of getting up and going, we're moving to Circle because it's cheap, we get up and we say, hey, you know how you guys are frustrated by this? You know how you're frustrated by this? I've heard from many of you that this is a situation that actually holds you back. Well, we have looked into it, and here's how Circle solves those problems. It's a very different style of leadership than going, hey, everybody get on board. We're moving. We're doing it in 3 weeks. So move yourself. No, that makes me the hero of the story, not you. It makes our company the hero of the story, not our employees. And people resist that kind of change. And that is really like, I'm not kidding. Even when you go into employee reviews, if you're setting goals, helping employees set quarterly goals, or you're working to do a review for people over the past quarter, don't walk in and just immediately go, well, you're not hitting your numbers, or the company is not hitting the numbers. This is where you need to be, blah, blah, blah. You need to walk in and go, hey, I know you, and here's where I've heard you tell me you want to be. Here's the problem that's getting in the way of that right now.
Yep.
What's our plan to solve that problem?
Yep.
Not, you're a bad employee. So any leadership meeting, any conference you're at, in fact, again, when you're on stage, if you're getting up and speaking at a breakout session, don't get up on that stage. Let's say you're teaching at a conference. When you get up on stage, you shouldn't get up on stage and go, hey, everybody, here's a funny story about me speaking. And here, I think everybody in this room needs to be more about working with people leading with people instead of just leading them. If you walk up and start with that, you're telling your story. But if you get up on stage and go, how many people here have ever stepped up on stage and all of a sudden gone, I don't know if I belong here? Everybody's going to raise their hand. Or if you say, how many of you have ever been in a meeting where you feel like, I don't understand why everybody is not on board with where we're headed? You know it's best for the company. You know it's best for them, and yet they're resisting change. Why does that happen? Everybody in that moment is going to nod their head. What you're doing from a narrative perspective is you're actually entering into their story in that moment, because they're going, yeah, that's a problem I experience.
Wow.
Then the next hour, you give your solution to that problem. But in that first 5 minutes when you're on the stage, you should not tell anything about yourself. You should not talk about any of your solutions, anything. If you're on that stage, you have the credibility to be there. Somebody has brought you there. Do not try to earn that credibility. You already have it. Stand in your guidance, stand in your confidence, in your strength. Don't act out of your backstory of pain. Stand there in your confidence and speak to their problem. And if you can start there, you're going to hook people, and you're actually going to ultimately move them to action.
Wow. Well, any speakers listening, you just also got a master class, because that's just gold. That's just absolute gold. I want to tell you a real quick funny. I was at speaking recently to some financial advisors, and when we talk about kind of our signature messages, to speak with your clients, not at them. We go through the differences, and really at the end of the day, when you speak at them, you don't get referrals, and you're in all that kind of stuff. But if you're going to speak with them, one of my points is to bring them into the story. And so I give all credit to StoryBrand, talk about it. It's in the resource list and all that. But we were talking about guides, and I was like, look, it's great being a guide, and let's do some examples. And I used the Star Wars example, and I was like, who was Luke Skywalker's guide? And a guy yells, Chewbacca. And the whole place just turns like it was the
Hmm.
most. It was awesome. It was the most amount of feedback I probably have ever like an entire room just turn and look at this guy. Like, and he was serious. I was like, oh
Yeah,
boy.
he was so confident with that
Yeah.
answer, and he was ready to go all in on it, and he was so excited. Oh, I love that.
I do as I've listened to you guys, unpack this on the podcasts and all that kind of stuff. I do want to say you're missing out on sharing. I think one of the best guides ever, and I could be corrected. I and if I am, tell me. But I don't think you've ever used Chubbs from Happy Gilmore as a guide because I mean now that's he
That is
put
a
it all on
guide.
the line.
That is 100% a great guide. Yes, I might have to. That all of my other references are getting old anyway, so I might as well go dig deep to the well right there because that's an old reference. But yes, and I will tell. So here's actually how you discover when you say like, "Am I wrong or am I right about who's the guide?" Here's how you can discover who the guide is in a story. The guide is the person who doesn't change, who doesn't transform.
Mm,
Now, occasionally you can break that, like Gandalf actually goes from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, but that's not necessary for the story to be good. Truthfully, the hero, the hero is the one who goes on the change. The guide actually is steady and strong, and the strongest character all the way through. So in Mary Poppins is actually the guide. The dad is the hero because he's the one who goes on the story arc. So if you're like, well, who is the guide and who is the hero in a story?
uh-huh.
If it's a good story that actually follows the rules, the guide doesn't change. The hero is the one who
Interesting.
changes. And there can be multiple guides throughout. So there can be, if especially like on a road journey, on a
Mhm.
road trip movie, they might be 6 guides along the way that represent something in each of those areas. But that's kind of the quick way when everybody asks me like who's the
Yep.
guide and who's the hero in a movie, it's who doesn't change and who does.
So then, see if I have this right. If you are an Office fan, you probably are a Ted Lasso fan. So in Ted Lasso, then Ted's obviously the guide,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Because he stays consistent. Talk about a villain. I mean, arc with Nate. I'm like, oh my goodness, like
Yeah.
that was wild.
Well, that was when I discovered that like just that statement I said earlier about that the hero in a movie and the villain typically both have a similar backstory of pain. Typically, that's why villains often have a scar on their face, as we want to show that they've been
Mm,
through hard things. And but the hero tries to redeem, the villain tries to revenge, and I find that in again leadership and in any kind of communication or even just my life is that there's those moments where like I can admit that there are moments where I try to hurt people or
mm,
try to shame them or something because like they've in my moments of weakness I attack versus try to help even if they're the people who are attacking me.
oh,
I turn into an attacker because I've been hurt
yep.
by them, so now I'm going to hurt them. And I just always tell myself in those moments, you just became a villain. You just became a villain.
Yep.
And you tried to revenge that pain. And I'm human, and so I try not to as often as I can.
Yep.
But I really when I kind of put those two things together and goes, oh, a hero actually redeems. And in my own life, I am the hero of my own story. And I am trying to redeem my own pain and I'm my own backstory. And I am trying to win the day. And that's okay. But when it comes to actually working with other people, your goal should be to actually be the guide, not the hero, the victim, or the villain.
Wow. Wow. Let's go back for a second, especially when it comes to leaders. Sometimes we overshare and we have all this stuff that we want to share. Wow. How do you think we can get to the place where we're figuring out, okay, I've got way too much. If I'm going to be clear, if I'm going to make sure that this really gets through, if I'm not pounding the information in, how can I can pull that back and make sure I'm very clear and consistent with that.
Yeah, I mean, what I teach people to do is use the story brand framework. And really, whenever you get into any kind of communication situation, you should really think about 7 specific talking points. These are elements of story. And I'll kind of go over these just briefly. But a good story is that there's a hero who wants something, who encounters a problem, number 2. Number 3, meets a guide. 4, who gives them a plan. 5, calls them to action that results in 6 and 7, which is success or failure. So that's every movie has those 7 kind of plot points to it. Hero who wants something really specific that encounters a problem that gets in the way of that, meets a guide who gives him a plan, and then call to action, success and failure. So to put that in, Luke Skywalker side of things is Luke. He wants to be a Jedi. The problem is the Empire, the Death Star is killing the planets and other Jedis. He meets a guide in Obi-Wan Kenobi who gives him a plan of trusting the Force and learning to trust the Force. There's a moment that he's called to action where he has to destroy the Death Star. And it's been foreshadowed what the failure of that looks like. Another planet will die. The rebellion will die. That's failure. Or success can happen. The rebellion wins and everybody's happy and everybody lives. So those, you can do that for every kind of movie. The reason why every movie is like that is because story is actually formulaic. There's formula for creating good stories, and that's one of the most simple forms that I just gave, those 7 elements. And when you understand that formula then almost acts like a filter for all the information that's out there. The main story that you need to tell, or the main speaking you need to tell, has to go through that filter. Have I, as a leader, identified what it is that my audience or my employees want? Have I identified that? Have I spoken to the problem that gets in the way of that? Have I positioned myself as their guide in this situation to help them overcome their problems? What is my plan for them to overcome those problems? What specific call to action? What is the action they need to take in order to win the day? And have I foreshadowed what success or failure looks like? Have I told them what happens if they don't do this for their story? And have I told them what their life could look like if they do follow through on this? Those 7 elements act then as a filter to basically force us to tell a very clear and compelling story and leave out all the other things. It's kind of like the difference between music and noise. Noise is, we all know what noise is, right? It's just a bunch of sounds and claps and, all this stuff, and that's just noise. But music is just noise submitted to rules. Right. So like I can kind of do this clapping and all this, snapping and everything. And that's just noise. But I don't know if you know the group Stomp. Have you ever, you know of Stomp, but all of a sudden we go from, I moved from just clapping and noise to submitting it to rules, a rhythm, and now I'm making music. Well, it's the same thing with communication. We have all of this information that we want to convey at people, and we want to tell them, and we think it's really important, and it's so like all this stuff, and the more information we give them, the more grateful they're going to be and the more they'll understand it. And the reality is most of that is just noise. And if we don't submit it through the rules of story, then we're not going to make music when we're talking to people. It just comes across as noise. And if we're not making the story about them, they're not designed to pay attention to it. Our brains really help us focus on information that helps us survive and thrive, keeps us alive all the time. We are always looking. Our brain is just constantly scanning our horizon for information that contributes to our survival and thriving. So if I was at a stadium, if you and I were at a stadium and I'm on a mic in front of thousands of people and I say, how many people in this stadium know how many chairs are in here? I bet 0 people would raise their hands. But if I said, how many people here know where the exits are? Every single hand in that stadium is going up. That's because subconsciously in the room, when they walked in, their brain paid attention to the information that contributed to their story, their survival. And they filtered out, doesn't matter how many lights are in the ceiling, how many tiles are on the floor, how many chairs are in the room. That doesn't matter to my survival. What matters is where the exits are, where the food is, where the stage is. That's it. So I'm wandering a little, but really what I'm saying is when we use the power of story, that filter, to go in and focus on our customer, what we're doing is we're not only getting rid of the noise, we're making music, and we're making the story about them, and we're giving them information that they need to survive and thrive. Most communicators, I would argue, are positioning their message as the chairs, and people are looking for the exits. We need to be about making their story the center of it, not our own. And if we can use that story filter to do that, it just makes it so much easier.
Well, and just like you said, I mean, my goodness, how many we coach a lot of middle managers, and middle managers are struggling because for the first time they're not doing the job anymore, but they're overseeing people doing the job. But how I think I've heard it said maybe a few times on your podcast and the other podcast, Business Made Simple. The human brain longs for story. I'm pretty sure I've heard you guys say that. But why don't we use that in the workplace more often? I mean,
Yeah.
just how you just laid it out. Middle managers would succeed to a different level. C-suite would succeed to a different level if we've thought through in that mode. You could just single-handedly bring so much productivity to many teams who are all stopped. And because many of those leaders who are leading at people who want all the authority to come from them, they're top-down leaders, they're forcing and aggressive. They're only thinking about how are all these people making me look better
Yep.
instead of how do I make my team look better. Oh, just amazing.
100%. And I would say honestly, and it's changed my life.
Oh,
Like when I really kind of discovered these principles, it not only changed the way I lead, but it changed the way I live.
mm,
And I would very much argue that my life is better because of it. It's at least my shoulders are drop a little bit more. I'm a little bit more gentle. I'd feel a little less threatened, truthfully, because the story's not about me. The story's
yep,
not about me. I don't
yep,
need to make it about me. It's about
yep.
helping other people win.
And what's frustrating so often though is people do follow those leaders who have to make it about themselves, who force their communication. Like it's like they fall in line, uh, and it's it's just mind-boggling sometimes. I'm like, there's a better way. The first book I ever read, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm 17 years old. I'm like, okay, this is it. I keep going back to a 120-year-old book.
Yeah.
It's just something. Our time has gone super fast. I can ask you, 17 more questions, which I did want to say when you were just talking about you and I standing on stage, I've had that dream. So if you ever want to make it happen, you just let me
Well,
know.
one day it will. One day it will.
I absolutely love that. As we kind of wrap up the time before I hit you with some rapid fire questions, when you kind of hear this phrase "lead with people," uh, how would you put that in as you've kind of processed it? For a leader to encourage them. Okay, when I lead with people. Here's what that
Yeah.
looks like.
To me, it really is like it's kind of what we've been talking about. It's the idea that the story is not about me. And
Yes.
so my job is to be in the story of the people I'm leading. So we have to be in the story is with Gandalf doesn't matter in the story if Frodo doesn't need help, and same with like I sometimes I use the illustration of like Hunger Games. Katniss is trying to win the Hunger Games, and Haymitch has already been in the Hunger Games and he won the Hunger Games. If Katniss is trying to fall in love and open uh, a bakery, Katniss doesn't. I mean, Haymitch doesn't matter in the story. He only
Mm,
matters because he's helping her win her story.
yep.
So he has to be. He is with her in the story. There is no separate Haymitch story. I mean, you could probably do a backstory that's a completely other movie, but in this movie, the only way he exists in this story is because he's doing it with her. She's
Mm,
the hero. And so that's the part where when we're talking about leading is I have to remember so often, yes, I want to write a good story with my life. I want to tell a good story with my life. But when it comes to leading other people, it the story actually is about them.
mm,
Otherwise you're not leading. You're really not. You're marching to the beat of your own drum, and sometimes you're scaring people into being a part of your story. Really, you're scaring them to be a part of your story, or you're manipulating them to be a part of your story. But the reality is,
yep.
if you're not actually in their story, it's not about leadership to me.
Oof.
And so that's where it's really in the sense of the only way that I want to lead is with people.
Mm,
And it really is that illustration I was saying is like I want to be more like Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz. Like we're all headed to the Emerald City, and
yep.
there is a pathway, but I'm a little lost. You're a little broken too. You are missing a little bit of courage. Let's just link arms and go together. And I think that's actually a much more powerful journey anyway, and frankly, more fun.
Boy, I love it. We're building an online library, so for leaders to be able to go to and get encouraged, find new resources. And so we ask all of our guests 3 rapid fire questions. Is there a speaker that every time you hear them speak, you just are blown away? They fill your bucket. They check off the checklist. You want to refer them to other people. Is there somebody that you would say, oh, you gotta listen to?
John Acuff.
Mm.
I've never not seen him hit a home run, and I've seen him probably about a dozen times at conferences. And honestly, what's kind of funny is in the moment, I could tell you probably each of the talks, but I don't know what he actually does for a living. Except for like encourage and empower people. And that's just, I always tell people, you need a home run hitter at your conference, get John Acuff. He can talk about anything, and he'll also do great.
Mm. Is there a podcast, if you're a podcast listener, not everybody is, but is there a guilty pleasure or a development one that you're just like, I keep going back to it, I forward it on to friends?
I don't know. I mean, what's interesting is I listen to a lot of kind of like comedy podcasts. And so it's less when I'm listening to podcasts, it's usually not for, I listen to one-off podcasts for information, but if I'm listening to a series, it's usually like there's one right now that I'm really into called the Seth Meyers and Lonely Island guys. I think it's what it is. Basically, they're just going back through all the Lonely Island shorts that were on SNL in the like early 2000s, and
Yep.
I think they're hilarious, and I love the way they love each other. It really actually like the way they interact is really cool. So it's just a feel-good, funny podcast.
I love it. And is there a book, a leader's about to get wrecked on a desert island? You got one book, that's all you can take. Is there a book that you'd highly recommend?
Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. I mean, but I would say the one that most recently has probably changed my life the most is Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. It really teaches you, it lives into some of these guide kind of principles as well, of the idea of what if you can make everybody feel seen, heard, and understood in what is typically a transactional environment, like a restaurant or a business. And so Unreasonable Hospitality is like rocking my world.
I just heard him speak a few weeks ago, and it was, every time I've heard him speak, I heard him on the Business Made Simple podcast. It's just mind-blowing. Where can we send people to find out more about you or to connect with you, those kind of things?
You can go, well, if you're interested in kind of like exploring a little bit more about this whole idea of like story and kind of creating talking points, we actually have what is called a brand script. It's called an online brand script that actually helps you create these 7 talking points for whatever story you're creating, whether it's a talk, marketing, or even a meeting. And you can go to mystorybrand.com. And you can actually, on there, you'll sign up, you'll create an account, and then you'll get access to a free online version of our brand script that will just have the 7 talking points that I just mentioned and a little video introduction to talk a little bit more about story. And you can actually on there, like say you have your next talk or your next meeting coming up, you can go on there and go, all right, what customers, heroes, the people I'm leading, what do they want? What is the problems that I'm going to speak to? How do I position myself as a guide? What's my plan? What's their call to action? And what does success and failure look like? So mystorybrand.com, and you can sign up for your own brand script there and begin kind of playing with this idea a little bit more.
Well, fantastic. Again, thank you so incredibly much. You have been a hero from afar. I appreciate how you've just poured into so many leaders, and you do it with just this incredible humility, and you're just absolutely brilliant. So appreciate all that you do to help so many.
Thank you so much. And I love this podcast. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. Thank you for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you for every like and every comment. Every single time you cut and copy a link and send it to a coworker or a friend, it absolutely means the world, and it helps each other transform our communication skills. Lastly, don't forget about a great resource that's that's available to you, our communication skills library. At the end of every episode, we ask each guest their favorite speaker, their favorite podcast, their favorite book, and we've compiled all of those resources together to give you an amazing library to continue your growth and development. Thank you again for being a listener and for being a part of the Speak with People community.